We rewrote grandfather's will. You only got the old library, my cousins informed me with a smirk at the family meeting. I didn't argue, but simply showed them a photograph of one of the books, which left them speechless. The call came at the most inconvenient moment. I was just finishing an urgent translation for a publishing house. The number wasn't identified, and I almost didn't pick up. I wish I hadn't answered. Elizabeth Parker? The dry female voice sounded detached, as if she was speaking not to a person, but to an answering machine. I'm instructed to inform you about the death of William Parker. The funeral will take place this Saturday. The reading of the will on Sunday at the family estate. My heart skipped a beat. I automatically opened my mouth to ask a question, but the phone was already beeping. Grandfather had died. I put down the phone and approached the window. Outside the glass, New York lived its usual life. Hurrying pedestrians, honking taxis, blinking signs. And I stood there, unable to believe it. Grandfather had seemed eternal, like the old oaks in his garden. A man from another era who never surrendered to time. We hadn't spoken for the last 5 years, not because of a quarrel, it just happened that way. After grandmother's death, he withdrew into himself, and I was too busy building a career in the big city. A typical excuse of a modern person. There's always something more important than visiting relatives. And now it's too late. Memories rushed in suddenly, vivid pictures from the past. Summer vacations in a huge Victorian house with white columns and a mysterious library. Long evenings in an armchair by the fireplace when grandfather read me his favorite books. His quiet voice explaining why some books are more valuable than gold. "Lizzie," he would say, carefully turning fragile pages. "A book is not just paper and ink. It's the author's soul, their thoughts, feelings, and knowledge, passed down through centuries. When you hold an old book in your hands, you become part of a chain connecting the past and future." I remember the smell of his library, wood, leather bindings, a bit of tobacco, and tea with bergamot, a smell that I always associated with wisdom and warmth. When I turned 16, grandfather gave me a first edition of Jane Austen. It was my first valuable book, which determined my life path. I became a translator of classical literature. And now he was gone. The Parker family estate looked exactly the same as in my memories, majestic and a bit gloomy. White columns supported the portico. Wide steps led to a massive oak door. The garden seemed abandoned. Apparently, in recent years, grandfather could no longer take proper care of it. I climbed the steps with a heavy heart. Yesterday's funeral left a depressing impression. Few people, formal condolences, and the feeling that an entire era was passing. Cousins James and Victoria kept their distance, barely nodding to me when we met. Not surprising, our relationship had never been warm. The door opened before I could knock. Victoria stood on the threshold, tall, slender, in a perfectly fitted black suit. Her blonde hair was gathered in an impeccable bun. Makeup emphasized aristocratic facial features. She gave me an appraising look, lingering on my simple clothes and worn bag. "Elizabeth," she said, in a tone that contained not a gram of warmth. "So you did come." "Hello, Victoria," I tried to smile. "Of course I came. He was my grandfather." "Our grandfather," she corrected, stepping aside. "You're not his only granddaughter, you know, although judging by your absence in recent years, one might think you'd forgotten about that." I swallowed a sharp response. Not the time or place for old grievances. In the spacious hall, several people had already gathered. I recognized Uncle Richard, James and Victoria's father, several distant relatives, and a man in a formal suit whom I'd never seen before. James stood by the fireplace, talking to someone on the phone. Seeing me, he frowned, hastily ended the conversation, and approached. "Elizabeth," he extended his hand for a formal handshake. "Glad you could find time in your busy schedule." James was 5 years older than me, tall, with dark hair and the Parker family's blue eyes. As a child, he constantly teased me. As a teenager, ignored me, and when we became adults, cold, polite relations established between us. I knew he worked for a financial company and considered himself extremely successful. James, I shook his hand. My condolences for your loss. Our loss, he corrected, just like Victoria had a minute earlier. Although, of course, some of us were closer to grandfather than others. I felt myself starting to get irritated. Always the same thing. Subtle hints, poisonous remarks, attempts to make me feel like an outsider. Please proceed to the living room, announced the man in the suit. I am Robert Higgins, Mr. Parker's attorney. We will begin reading the will in 5 minutes. The living room was a spacious room with high ceilings and large windows overlooking the garden. Antique furniture, paintings in heavy frames, a large fireplace. Everything breathed the history of the Parker family. I sat in a chair by the window, slightly apart from the others. Victoria and James settled on the sofa, quietly conversing and occasionally glancing in my direction. Mr. Higgins cleared his throat and took a folder of documents from his briefcase. Respected relatives of Mr. William Parker, he began in an official tone, we have gathered here to read the last will of the deceased. The will was drawn up 3 months ago and fully complies with all legal requirements. 3 months ago? Strange. I was sure grandfather had written his will long ago. I will proceed to the distribution of property, continued the lawyer. The Parker estate, including the land plot, main house, and all outbuildings, passes in equal shares to James Parker and Victoria Parker. I noticed how my cousins exchanged victorious glances. All bank accounts, securities, and other financial assets are also divided between James and Victoria Parker in equal shares. Mr. Higgins turned the page. Elizabeth Parker receives as inheritance the library, including all books, manuscripts, and related materials located in the corresponding room of the main house. I blinked. Just the library? Not that I was counting on a large share of the inheritance, but such obvious inequality surprised me. Grandfather had always treated me with special warmth. It seemed to me we understood each other better than he understood his other grandchildren. Is that all? I couldn't help asking. Mr. Higgins looked at me over his glasses. Yes, Miss Parker, that is all that concerns you directly. Grandfather always said you loved books more than people, James said with a smirk. Now you'll have enough time to spend with your favorite dusty tomes. James, his father reprimanded him, but without much enthusiasm. Victoria couldn't suppress a chuckle. We rewrote grandfather's will. You only got the old library, James said louder, not hiding his smugness. You didn't think he would leave anything substantial to such an ungrateful granddaughter, did you? I lost my breath. What do you mean, rewrote? I looked at the lawyer. Mr. Higgins frowned. Mr. Parker personally dictated his last will to me 3 months ago. I can assure you that the document is authentic and legally impeccable. Don't pay attention to James, Victoria intervened, forcing a smile. He's just joking. Grandfather made it clear that what he valued were family ties and the continuation of the Parker lineage. And you don't even have a permanent life partner, let alone prospects for continuing the family name. I felt myself blushing with anger and humiliation. Always the same thing, hints about my personal life, about me not meeting the Parker standards enough. If you have no questions about the content of the will, we can consider the official part concluded, said Mr. Higgins, clearly feeling uncomfortable. I will leave all necessary documents for review and signing. I silently nodded and was the first to leave the room. I needed fresh air. In the evening, when most relatives had left, I went up to the 2nd floor, where grandfather's library was located. My heart was pounding. This room had always been a special place for me. The heavy oak door yielded with a familiar creak, and I entered the sanctuary of books. Nothing had changed. The same tall bookcases of dark wood, the same antique wheeled ladder, the same leather armchairs by the fireplace. I ran my hand over the spines of books. Many of them were familiar to me from childhood. Strangely, I felt no disappointment that I had received just the library. On the contrary, here I felt grandfather's presence more strongly than anywhere else in this huge house. I sat in his favorite armchair and closed my eyes. I remembered his words. Books are not just things, Lizzie. They are treasures that need to be read between the lines. What did he mean? Perhaps there was something else in the library? I opened my eyes and began to carefully examine the room. My gaze stopped at the writing desk by the window. That's where Grandfather usually wrote his notes and kept his diary. The diary. I wonder if he continued to keep it until the very end. Pulling out the top drawer of the desk, I discovered a stack of notebooks in leather bindings. The topmost was dated last year. I opened it and recognized Grandfather's handwriting, firm, with a characteristic rightward slant. June 15th. Today I received confirmation of the authenticity of the first edition of Shakespeare. The expert examination confirmed the autograph indeed belongs to Ben Jonson. A priceless find for my collection. I turned several pages. September 3rd, James visited again. Talked about some deal, demanded I sign papers. He's becoming more insistent. I don't trust him, but I have to pretend I'm old and don't understand what's happening. My heart beat faster. I continued reading. October 12th. The lawyer insists on a new will. I suspect James and Victoria are planning something. Need to protect the true treasure from their greed. Lizzie will understand. She always understood what's important. I turned a few more pages and suddenly discovered a glued-in photograph. It showed an open book, clearly ancient, with yellowed pages. Under the photo, Grandfather had written, First Shakespeare Folio, 1623. On the flyleaf, Ben Jonson's autograph. To my friend William, whose memory will live forever. I gasped with excitement. The First Shakespeare Folio, one of the rarest and most valuable books in the world. And it was here, in this library? The value of such a book could be millions of dollars. I quickly took out my phone and photographed this page of the diary, then continued reading. My true collection is known only to a few. Official appraisers have seen only a small part. What is considered just an old family library actually contains several dozen of the rarest editions, the value of which exceeds the cost of the entire Parker estate together with the land. I reread this entry several times, not believing my eyes. So, Grandfather deliberately left me the library, and it's worth more than all the other real estate that went to my cousins? There was a knock at the door. I quickly closed the diary and hid it in my bag. Elizabeth? Victoria peeked into the room. What are you doing here so late? This is my library, isn't it? I replied, trying to speak calmly. Just getting acquainted with my inheritance. Victoria entered the room, with James appearing behind her. Hope you're not too disappointed, he said. After all, Grandfather was fair. Everyone got what they deserved. I slowly rose from the armchair, took out my phone, and showed them the photograph of the page from the diary. Do you know what this is? They leaned over the screen. Victoria frowned, and James turned pale. Where did you get this? His voice sounded tense. From Grandfather's diary, I answered. It turns out that in this old library, there is a first edition of Shakespeare with Ben Jonson's autograph. And, according to Grandfather's notes, this is just one of many valuable books here. Interesting. Why did he decide to leave all this to me and not to you? Victoria tried to snatch the phone from me, but I stepped back. You have no right, she cried out. My grandfather, my diary, my library, I retorted. And apparently my rare book collection worth millions of dollars. James quickly regained his composure. This means nothing, he said coldly. The will is signed and certified. All books are part of the house property, which means they belong to Victoria and me. If you try to take anything out of here, we'll sue you for theft. I smiled. Interesting interpretation, but the will clearly states, the library including all books, manuscripts, and related materials. You see, James, I'm not just a book lover. I'm a translator. I work with words and their meanings, and Grandfather's words are quite unambiguous. You'll regret this, Victoria hissed. Perhaps, I replied. But now I would like to be left alone in my library, and it's time for you to leave this room. Victoria stormed out of the room, slamming the door. James lingered at the threshold. This is not the end, Elizabeth. he said threateningly. "We won't give up so easily." "I'm not counting on that," I replied, but apparently, Grandfather didn't expect that either. I wonder what else he prepared for us. When the door closed behind James, I returned to the writing desk. The next few hours I spent reading Grandfather's diaries and gradually understanding the scale of his true collection. This was just the beginning of a long battle, but for the first time in many years, I felt I was not alone. Grandfather had left me not just a library, he had left me a mystery, an enigma, and a challenge, and I wasn't going to back down. A week passed since that memorable evening when I put my cousins in their place. I took leave from the publishing house. Fortunately, my editor was understanding about the situation. Family matters and an unexpected inheritance? Take as much time as you need. Just bring us back an interesting story, he said. If only he knew what a story I had already found. I decided to temporarily settle in Grandfather's house. According to the will, the library belonged to me, and I had every right to be there. James and Victoria had gone to the city, probably to consult with lawyers, and this gave me time to calmly begin inventorying my inheritance. Grandfather's library occupied 2 spacious rooms on the 2nd floor. The first was furnished as a living room, with armchairs, a fireplace, and a writing desk. The second was a real repository with bookcases from floor to ceiling. I started by compiling a catalog. On an old laptop, I created a table, title, author, year of publication, condition, notes. I took each book in my hands, carefully examined it, and recorded the information. The work turned out to be slow. On the first day, I managed only 1 small bookcase, but I had already made several amazing discoveries. Gulliver's Travels by Jonathan Swift, first edition of 1726, in excellent condition. Emma by Jane Austen, first edition of 1816, with a dedication from the publisher. A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens, a copy signed by the author. By evening, my head was spinning with delight and fatigue. I closed my laptop and went to the window. The sun was setting behind the garden trees, coloring the old house in warm pink tones. What did you have in mind, Grandfather? Why did you leave me this treasure? The next day, I continued with the cataloging. Now I worked with greater confidence, already understanding the system of book arrangement. Grandfather had organized his collection not by alphabet or genres, but by countries and epochs, from ancient manuscripts to modern first editions. In the far corner of the library, I discovered a small safe built into the wall behind one of the bookcases. It was locked and I couldn't find the key. Another puzzle to solve. As I was sorting through books on the top shelf using a stepladder, my phone vibrated. An email from a certain Alan Prescott, lawyer. I opened it, anticipating trouble. Dear Miss Parker, our firm represents the interests of James and Victoria Parker regarding the inheritance of the late William Parker. It has come to our attention that you have illegally appropriated and removed from the main house certain personal belongings of the deceased, including, but not limited to, diaries, photographs, and documents that are an integral part of the inheritance that passed to our clients. We hereby demand that within 48 hours you return all property removed from the house. Otherwise, we will be forced to go to court with a claim to protect the property rights of our clients and compensation for damages caused. Respectfully, Alan Prescott, Senior Partner, Prescott, Hammond and Partners. I reread the letter twice, feeling anger rising. Grandfather's diaries? Seriously? This was outright intimidation. I opened my bag where I kept the diary I had taken on the first evening. It needed to be hidden in a safe place. Flipping through the pages, I came across an entry I hadn't noticed before. November 14th. Michael agreed to help with the assessment of the folio. He's the only one I can trust in this matter. Too many predators circling around, sensing prey. Bond Street, the rare word shop. Michael. It seems Grandfather mentioned him several times in conversations. A bookseller, an expert on rare editions, one of Grandfather's few friends in recent years. Perhaps he could help? I quickly found the shop, The Rare Word, on Bond Street on the internet. The site was modest, but informative. a vintage bookstore specializing in rare editions and manuscripts. Owner, Michael Weston, a hereditary bookseller in the third generation. Without hesitation, I dialed the phone number listed on the site. The Rare Word Shop, how can I help you? Answered a pleasant male voice. Hello, I faltered, not knowing where to start. My name is Elizabeth Parker. I'm William Parker's granddaughter. He recently... Miss Parker, the voice on the other end softened. I know about your loss. William was my friend for many years. Please accept my condolences. Thank you, Mr. Weston. I found your contact in grandfather's diary. I think you can help me with an important matter. There was a pause. I think we'd better meet in person, he said finally. When can you come to the shop? Tomorrow morning? Perfect. I'll be expecting you at 10. The shop, The Rare Word, turned out to be exactly as I had imagined it, cozy, a bit old-fashioned, with heavy oak shelves and the smell of old books. The bell above the door melodiously chimed when I entered. Behind the counter sat a gray-haired man about 60, with thin-framed glasses and a tweed jacket. Seeing me, he stood up. Miss Parker? He extended his hand. Michael Weston. Glad to meet you, although the circumstances could be better. We went to the back room of the shop, where there was an antique tea set and 2 worn leather armchairs. I told him everything, about the strange will, about the clash with my cousins, about grandfather's diary and his collection. Michael listened attentively, without interrupting. When I finished, he took off his glasses and thoughtfully wiped them with a handkerchief. Your grandfather was an outstanding collector, he said finally, but few knew the true scale of his collection. He preferred to keep it secret. Why? William survived the war, Michael replied. It left an imprint on him. He didn't trust people and institutions, preferred to keep his treasures in quiet. Besides, the more famous the collection, the greater the risk of theft or fraud. But he trusted you? Michael smiled. We met more than 30 years ago at an auction in Paris. We both wanted to acquire the first edition of Voltaire's Candide. I was a young bookseller then, and your grandfather was already a known collector. He won the auction and then offered me to jointly study the book. That's how our friendship began. He rose and approached a small safe. William left something in storage, he said, entering the combination. Asked to give it to you if anything happened to him. Michael took out a small box and handed it to me. Inside was an old key and an envelope with my name. What is this? I asked. That I don't know, Michael replied. He never said what exactly he kept in this box, only asked to pass it to you. I opened the envelope. Inside was a sheet of paper with an inscription made in grandfather's familiar handwriting. Dear Lizzie, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. Don't grieve. We all leave someday. The key will open the door to the real treasure for you. But be careful. Not all that glitters is gold, and not all books are read the same way. Look where the winter light touches the summer flower. Your loving grandfather. I reread the note. More riddles. What does winter light touches the summer flower mean? He always loved puzzles, sighed Michael, noticing my confusion. He believed that real treasures must be earned. Mr. Weston, I looked up. Can you help me with the valuation of the library? I need to know what I'm dealing with. Of course, he nodded, but you should understand that such work will take time. And one more thing. He hesitated. Be careful. Rare books are not only a cultural, but also a financial value. Large sums sometimes awaken not the best human qualities. We agreed that in 2 days, he would come to the estate to inspect the library. Returning to the house, I immediately went up to the library. I couldn't stop thinking about grandfather's phrase, look where the winter light touches the summer flower. What could it mean? Winter light, perhaps the north window. The library had 4 windows, north, south, east, and west. I approached the north window and looked around. No flowers, just bookcases. Summer flower. Maybe it's a book title or a painting? I began examining the walls and noticed a small watercolor next to the window, a bouquet of wild flowers in a simple wooden frame. Looking closer, I saw the artist's signature in the corner. Summer day. E. Parker. Eleanor Parker, my grandmother. She was fond of painting and left behind several dozen watercolors. Could this be the summer flower? I removed the picture from the wall and discovered a small niche with a metal box behind it. The key that Michael had given me fit perfectly into the lock. Inside the box was a notebook in a dark red leather binding. On the first page was written, "The Bibliophile's Codex, William Parker." I started reading, and with each page my surprise grew. The notebook contained something like an encrypted catalog, lists of books, marked only with initials, page numbers, strange symbols in the margins. Some entries were made in Latin, some in French and German. The last entry was dated just a month earlier. Collection completed. The circle is closed. Now all points are connected and the map is ready. I hope Elle will appreciate the journey as much as the treasure at the end of the path. I closed the notebook, feeling that Grandfather had left me not just a collection of books, but a real quest. The keys to solving it must be somewhere here, among thousands of volumes. The next few hours I spent trying to decipher Grandfather's notes. It seems he used some system based on the initial letters of authors and titles. But without a key to the cipher, I could only guess. It was already getting dark when I decided to take a break. Going down to the kitchen, I made tea and a sandwich. The house seemed too big and empty. I should think about hiring security, especially after the threatening letter from my cousin's lawyer. Returning to the library, I stopped at the threshold, feeling that something was wrong. It took several seconds to understand. The window, which I was certain I had closed, was ajar. The draft was stirring the curtains. I quickly turned on the light and looked around. At first glance, everything seemed normal, but when I approached the desk where I had left my laptop, I discovered a puddle of water. Someone had overturned a vase directly onto the stack of books that I had set aside for special study. My heart pounded with fear and anger. I rushed to save the books, blotting them with napkins and arranging them to dry. Fortunately, most of them didn't suffer much. The water mostly got on the covers. But one volume, a first edition of Keats's sonnets, was soaked through. The pages stuck together, the ink ran. The book was irreparably damaged. Who could have done this? The answer was obvious. James or Victoria, or someone acting on their orders. This was no longer just threats, but actual sabotage. I went around the house, checking all the doors and windows. Everything was locked except for that window in the library. Someone had deliberately sneaked inside to specifically harm the books. Returning to the library, I noticed that Grandfather's diary remained untouched. Apparently, the perpetrator didn't know about its existence or didn't have time to get to it. I decided to study it more carefully. Flipping through the pages, I came across a section that I had missed earlier. It was written in small handwriting on the back of the end paper. Few know about my role in Operation Monument. Officially, I was just a communications lieutenant at headquarters, but in reality, my task was to save cultural heritage from the Nazis. While official treasure hunters were looking for paintings and sculptures, I was hunting for books. Berlin, April 1945. Bombings, chaos. In the basement of a destroyed building of the Imperial Chancellery, we found boxes with books from Goering's personal library. Among them were incunabula of the 15th century, stolen from European libraries. Later, I learned that some books disappeared on the way to collection points, spoils of war, as they said then. I could not accept that priceless cultural artifacts would become private trophies. Thus began my second mission, to buy back these books from collectors, often without revealing their true value, a lifelong work. I put down the diary, stunned. My grandfather was one of those legendary treasure hunters who saved works of art during World War II, but he never told the family about this. Why? On the next page, I found the answer. Some things are better kept secret. In the world of antiquarian books, there are many predators. The collection I've gathered is too valuable and too dangerous for everyone to know about. Some books have a dark past, and there are people who still consider them their property. I closed the diary, feeling my perception of grandfather changing. William Parker was not just an eccentric collector, he was a guardian of history, a man with a mission. And now that mission had passed to me. I spent a sleepless night reflecting on all I had learned. By morning, I had developed a plan of action. I needed to protect the most valuable books, decipher grandfather's notes, and find out what exactly he considered the real treasure. And for this, I had to buy time and possibly win the war with my cousins, who clearly weren't going to back down. The morning began with a sharp ring at the door. On the threshold stood a man in the uniform of a court courier. "Elizabeth Parker?" He extended an envelope to me. "You have a court summons. Sign here." I mechanically signed and closed the door. Opening the envelope with trembling hands, I saw an official notification. Case 347, Parker and Parker versus Parker, on declaration of will as invalid. The cousins weren't wasting time. Only 2 weeks had passed since the reading of the will, and they had already filed a lawsuit. I skimmed through the text, contesting the testator's capacity, signs of dementia, inconsistent decisions, manipulation by interested parties. The last phrase hit especially hard. They were accusing me of manipulating grandfather? Me, who hadn't seen him for 5 years? I sank into an armchair trying to collect my thoughts. The court hearing was scheduled for a month from now. I urgently needed a lawyer. Within an hour, I was talking to Rebecca Fleming, an attorney specializing in inheritance cases. She listened to my story attentively, without interrupting. "The situation is complicated," she said finally. "On one hand, the previous will existed for many years, and the new one appeared 3 months before your grandfather's death. On the other hand, all legal formalities were observed, and Mr. Higgins is a respected attorney with an impeccable reputation." "Grandfather wasn't incapacitated," I said firmly. "He was old, but his mind remained sharp until the end." "That will need to be proven," Rebecca nodded. "We'll need medical conclusions, testimonies from people who communicated with him in the last months. Possibly video recordings, letters proving his clarity of mind." "I can provide his diaries," I said. "He kept them until the very end. The handwriting is firm, the thoughts clear." "Excellent. What else?" "There's an expert bookseller who communicated with him shortly before his death, and possibly his doctor." "Good." Rebecca began taking notes. "We'll build the defense on the fact that your grandfather consciously left you the most valuable part of the inheritance because of your understanding and love for books. It was a reasonable decision, given your profession and interests." I nodded, feeling some relief. At least I had a plan of action. "Now for the unpleasant part," continued Rebecca. "My fee. Given the complexity of the case and the reputation of the opposing side, this will be an expensive process." She named a sum that took my breath away. "That's a lot," I said, trying to hide my shock. "Those are the realities," Rebecca shrugged. "Your cousins have surely hired the best lawyers. We won't have a second chance. If we lose, you lose everything." I left Rebecca's office with a heavy heart. The amount she requested exceeded my annual savings. I could make the initial payment, but after that. Returning to the estate, I painfully calculated options. Take a loan? Borrow from friends? Michael Weston's words came to mind. Rare books are not only a cultural, but also a financial value. The solution came unexpectedly. If I sold one of the most valuable books from the collection, it would be enough to pay the lawyer and still have something left. After all, that's better than losing the entire library. Michael Weston carefully examined the book I brought, the first edition of Gulliver's Travels by Jonathan Swift from 1726. "In excellent condition," he muttered, carefully turning the pages. "All 4 parts, original binding. At auction, such a copy could go for £100,000 to £150,000. I swallowed. The amount exceeded my expectations. "But you want to sell it quickly," continued Michael. "In that case, I can offer you $70,000. It's a fair price, considering that I'll have to take care of the provenance and find a buyer." "I agree," I nodded. That would be enough for the lawyer with some reserve. Michael looked at me for a long moment. Miss Parker, are you sure you want to sell just one book? What do you mean? He stood up and locked the door of his office. Listen, he said, lowering his voice. I was friends with your grandfather for many years. I know that you're facing a long and dirty court battle. Your cousins won't stop until they get everything. I silently waited to see where he was going. I can offer you a way out, continued Michael. I'm ready to buy the entire collection at once, right now, without any fuss. £2 million in cash. $2 million? I couldn't believe my ears. It's a fair price, given the circumstances, said Michael. The collection, of course, is worth more, but you'll get the money immediately and be rid of all problems. I'll make sure the books end up in good hands. I looked at the man whom I considered a friend and ally and didn't recognize him. Something in his eyes had changed. A predatory gleam appeared that I hadn't noticed before. $2 million, I repeated, for a collection that, in your own words, is priceless. Business is business, Miss Parker. I'm taking a risk by offering such a sum. You might lose the court case and end up with nothing. Thank you for the offer, Mr. Weston. I stood up. But I'm only selling Gulliver. The rest of the collection is not for sale. Michael's face froze. As you wish, but my offer is limited in time. After the court process begins, it will be withdrawn. I left the shop with a check for £70,000 and a heavy feeling of betrayal. Another ally turned out to be a wolf in sheep's clothing. Returning to the estate, the first thing I did was call Rebecca to arrange the advance payment. Then I went up to the library, intending to continue deciphering grandfather's notes. While sorting through books in one of the cabinets, I accidentally pressed some protrusion, and part of the shelf silently moved aside, revealing a small niche. Inside stood a metal box, not a safe, just a closed box. I carefully extracted it and placed it on the table. There was no lock, just a simple latch. Inside lay a thick folder labeled Parker Investments, Internal Investigation. The first document was handwritten. It was a draft letter addressed to the company's board of directors. Gentlemen, as a result of my investigation, serious financial violations in the company's activities over the past 3 years have been identified. Document verification shows systematic withdrawal of funds through shell companies in the Cayman Islands and British Virgin Islands. The total amount of withdrawn funds exceeds £4 million. Particularly alarming is the fact that all suspicious operations were authorized directly by the financial director, James Parker. I demand an immediate internal audit and suspension of the financial director's authority until all circumstances are clarified. William Parker, founder and chairman of the board of directors. The letter was dated 4 months earlier, but apparently was never sent. Instead, grandfather began gathering evidence. The folder contained bank statements, copies of contracts, emails, photographs of James meeting with some dubious individuals, and most striking, a printout of an email from James to Victoria. Victoria, the old man suspects something. Yesterday, he requested a full audit for the past 3 years. We need to act faster. Discuss the details of the new will with Prescott. The incapacity documents are almost ready, Doctor. Harris has agreed to sign them retroactively. I'll handle the financial part. You, the legal, James. I sat, stunned by my discovery. James wasn't just dishonestly running the family business. He was planning to effectively remove grandfather from managing his own company by declaring him incapacitated. And the new will, apparently, was part of this plan. But grandfather turned out to be cleverer. He must have learned about their plans and made his own will, deliberately leaving me the library, the only part of the inheritance whose true value the cousins didn't understand. Deeper in the box lay a sealed envelope with my name. I carefully opened it. Dear Lizzie, if you're reading this letter, it means my suspicions were justified, and James and Victoria have made their move. I don't know how far they've gone, but knowing their ambitions and greed, I think they'll try to take even the library from you when they understand its true value. I must tell you the truth that I've hidden for too long. It concerns your mother, my dear daughter, Catherine. You've always believed that she left the family because of her irresponsible character, as you were told. This is a lie spread by my son Richard and his wife to blacken Catherine in your eyes. The truth is that Catherine discovered Richard's financial machinations in the mid-90s. He was diverting money from the company, forging my signature on documents. A family scandal followed. Richard and his wife threatened her and then spread rumors about her supposedly inappropriate behavior and unstable psyche. I was weak then and allowed this to happen. My greatest shame is that I didn't stand up for my daughter as resolutely as I should have. When she left, taking you, I didn't follow, trying to reconcile the family. This is my fault, and I've paid for it for the rest of my life. Catherine told me the truth shortly before her death. She didn't want these secrets to haunt you, so I kept silent. But now, when history is repeating itself with James, I cannot allow this lie to continue. James and Victoria are Richard's children, and they inherited his worst qualities: greed, ambition, lack of moral principles. For years they tried to isolate me from you, intercepting my letters, losing my messages, telling me that you were too busy with your new life to visit a boring old man. I suspected this, but finally understood when I accidentally overheard their conversation last year. They were talking about how convenient it was that you and I had grown apart, and how this would facilitate their plans to revise the will. Forgive me, Lizzie, for not being stronger, for allowing these intrigues to separate us, but you've always been my true heir. That's why I left you the most valuable thing I have, not only a collection of rare books, but also the key to the truth. Look in T.S. Eliot's The Waste Land, first edition, page 42. There you'll find the next key. Your loving grandfather, William. I reread the letter 3 times, feeling tears rolling down my cheeks. All these years, all the lies, all the manipulations. My mother didn't abandon the family. She was forced to leave because she wanted to expose the deception. And now history was repeating itself. I remembered how 5 years ago I stopped receiving regular letters from grandfather, how strangely our phone conversations were cut off due to bad connection, how Victoria once accidentally mentioned that grandfather was upset that I didn't come to his birthday, an invitation I never received. Everything fell into place. I rushed to the bookcase where poetry collections were kept. The Waste Land, by T.S. Eliot, first edition of 1922, was found quickly. I opened page 42 and discovered a thin envelope inserted between the pages. Inside were old photographs. Grandfather, grandmother, my mother and I, very small, against the backdrop of the estate. A happy family. And on the back an inscription: the only true heir of the Parkers, Lizzie. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. Under the photographs lay another sheet of paper, a copy of a medical conclusion dated a month earlier. Patient William Parker, 82 years old. Cognitive functions fully preserved. No signs of dementia or other neurodegenerative diseases. The patient is fully competent and adequate. So grandfather foresaw their move with contesting his competence and had undergone an independent medical examination in advance. I smiled through tears. Smart, foresighted old man. He had planned everything, set clues, created a path that I was supposed to follow. I gathered all the found documents and photographed them. This was my weapon in the upcoming battle. Suddenly, I had a thought. I need to check the other books mentioned in grandfather's encrypted catalog. What if each of them contains a clue or document? I rushed to the shelf with classic literature and found the first edition of The Great Gatsby. Between the pages, another envelope. In it, photographs of James meeting with some dubious characters in an expensive restaurant. On the back, dates and signatures. In the first edition of The Three Musketeers, a copy of a bank statement with strange transactions. Grandfather didn't just leave me the library, he created an archive of evidence, carefully hidden among rare books. I sank into an armchair, overwhelmed with emotions. A difficult battle lay ahead, but now I had weapons. The cousins thought they were fighting me, but in reality, their opponent was grandfather, who had carefully planned his every move even after death. I took out my phone and dialed Rebecca Fleming's number. Miss Fleming, I have new evidence. I think we need to change our defense strategy. We will no longer be defending. We'll go on the offensive. There was a knock at the door as I was finishing arranging documents into folders. The knock was confident, insistent, not at all like the timid tapping of the postman or the polite touch of a lawyer. I froze, listening. The clock showed almost 8 in the evening, too late for casual visits. Elizabeth, I know you're there, came Victoria's voice. Open up. We need to talk. I quickly gathered the laid-out documents and hid them in the writing desk. What did she want? Almost 2 weeks had passed since our last conversation, and I didn't expect to see my cousin until the court date. Going downstairs, I opened the door. Victoria stood on the threshold, perfectly dressed, with a perfect hairstyle, as if she had come for a business meeting, not shown up uninvited at 9 in the evening. Good evening, I said coldly. To what do I owe this? We need to talk, she repeated, walking past me into the hall, not waiting for an invitation. In private. I led her to the living room, trying to maintain outward calm, although inside I was boiling with indignation at her audacity. So? I didn't offer her a seat. Victoria surveyed the room with an appraising look, as if estimating how much it all cost. You've always been a smart girl, Lizzie, she began, using my childhood nickname, which from her lips sounded almost offensive. So I hope you'll understand the situation correctly. Which situation exactly? I crossed my arms over my chest. The legal one. She smiled a thin, unpleasant smile. James and I filed a lawsuit, that's true, but I'm here to offer a compromise. I'm listening. Victoria finally sat down without invitation, crossed her legs, and clasped her hands on her knee, a pose that she probably considered a demonstration of strength and confidence. We're ready to withdraw the lawsuit and recognize your right to the library on one condition, she paused. All documents that you found, and we know you found something, must be destroyed, and you'll sign a non-disclosure agreement. I maintained an impassive expression, although inside, alarm stirred. How does she know about the documents? I don't understand what you're talking about, I said calmly. Come on, Lizzie, she frowned. We know that grandfather was paranoid in recent years, collected some kind of evidence, kept records. All this is the ravings of an old man beginning to lose his mind. According to the medical conclusion, grandfather was absolutely sane until the very end, I noted. Victoria tensed, but quickly regained her composure. Listen, I'm offering you an easy way out. You get your books, everything else. No courts, no scandals. Family matters should remain within the family. And if I refuse? Her face momentarily contorted, but she quickly restored her mask of politeness. Then it will be very, very dirty, Lizzie. You have no idea what you're getting into. James has connections in all legal circles of the city. We have witnesses ready to confirm that grandfather in recent months was often disoriented and confused. There are prescriptions for strong medications that could affect his consciousness. Forgeries, I said firmly. Prove it, she retorted. And while you're trying to do that, the court will freeze all property, including your precious library. You won't be able to sell a single book to pay lawyers. The process will drag on for years. She was right, and that angered me most of all. They could use their money and connections to drag out the process indefinitely. And there's also the option that something bad might happen to you, added Victoria almost dreamily. Old houses are so dangerous. Electrical wiring, stairs, sudden fires. Are you threatening me? I couldn't believe my ears. Just considering possible scenarios, she shrugged and stood up. You have 3 days to think. After that, the offer will be withdrawn and we'll go all the way. When the door closed behind Victoria, I leaned against the wall, feeling my knees shaking. This was no longer just a legal battle, it was a threat to life. That night I barely slept, listening to every sound in the old house. In the morning I drank a double espresso and began to act, first I scanned all the found documents and sent copies to cloud storage, then collected the most valuable books and original key documents in a large bag. By noon, I had finished preparations and called my lawyer. "Rebecca, I need a reliable private detective. Anyone you can recommend?" "There's one woman," Rebecca replied after a pause. "Sarah Collins, former police officer, now a private investigator, charges a lot, but guarantees results." That's exactly what I need. I left the house in the evening, leaving lights on in several rooms to create the impression of my presence. Spent the night in a hotel under a false name, and in the morning met with Sarah Collins in her office. Sarah turned out to be a thin woman in her 40s with short dark hair and a keen gaze. No jewelry, strict suit, minimalist office. "Miss Parker," she shook my hand. "Rebecca briefly brought me up to speed, but I'd like to hear everything from you." I told her the whole story, showed the documents, photographs, grandfather's diary. "I need witnesses," I said, "people who will confirm that grandfather was of sound mind until the end, and I need evidence of my cousin's machinations." Sarah carefully studied the documents. "These are serious accusations: financial fraud, will forgery, threats. Your cousins risk not only losing a civil lawsuit, but also facing criminal charges." "That's exactly why they're so dangerous now," I nodded. "Yesterday, Victoria almost openly threatened me." "You need protection," Sarah said decisively. "I have reliable people, and you should stay away from the estate until we collect enough evidence." "I can't leave the library unattended." "Books can be replaced, life cannot," she cut me off. "We agreed on a plan of action. Sarah would search for witnesses and collect evidence. I would temporarily move to another place and coordinate the legal side with Rebecca." When I left Sarah's office, a surprise awaited me on the street. A tall man in an expensive coat was waiting at the entrance. "Miss Parker?" He stepped toward me. "My name is Daniel Hart. We need to talk." I instinctively stepped back, ready to run or call for help. "Don't be afraid," he said, noticing my reaction. "I'm a friend. I knew your grandfather." "A friend?" I narrowed my eyes. "Why should I believe you?" "Because I was one of the few who knew about his real collection," he replied, "and because Michael Weston contacted me, offering to buy books that are effectively stolen from you." This caught my attention. "Go on." "Not here." He nodded to a cafe across the street. "Too many ears." In the cafe, Daniel ordered 2 coffees and got to the point. "I'm a collector, like your grandfather. We often crossed paths at auctions, sometimes competed, sometimes collaborated. In recent years, he trusted me more than others." "Why have I never heard of you?" "Your grandfather was a cautious man. He carefully segmented his life, not allowing them to intersect." Daniel took an old photograph from his pocket. He and grandfather at some reception, both in tuxedos with champagne glasses. This was 2 years ago, at a charity evening at the British Library. I studied the photograph, trying to understand if he could be trusted. In the picture, grandfather looked relaxed and content, a rare expression for him in recent years. "What do you want, Mr. Hart?" "To help you," he said simply. "Michael Weston contacted me 3 days ago, offered me to join in the purchase of your grandfather's collection, said the owner is a naive girl who doesn't understand the true value of books. I immediately knew something was off." "And why did you decide to help me instead of profiting from the deal?" I still doubted. "Your grandfather was my friend," Daniel replied, "and I have my own scores to settle with Weston. He once tried to deceive me too." He handed me a business card. "I can offer you a safe place to store the most valuable books. I have a vault with climate control and security, and I can help with expertise if needed." I took the card, still unsure whether to trust him. "Think about it," he said, standing up. "Call when you decide." I returned to the hotel with mixed feelings. On one hand, Hart seemed sincere. On the other, I'd already been burned with Michael Weston and didn't want to repeat the mistake. My reflections were interrupted by a call from Sarah Collins. "I have good news," she said. I found your grandfather's former caretaker, Martha Jenkins. She worked with him for the last 6 months and is ready to testify that he was of sound mind. Moreover, she confirms that James and Victoria were pressuring him and often came with some documents." "That's wonderful," I exclaimed. "When can we meet her?" "Tomorrow morning. She lives in the countryside now, but agreed to come to my office." For the first time in a long while, I felt that luck was turning to my side. This feeling didn't last long. At night, I was awakened by a call, the estate manager I had hired to watch the house. "Miss Parker, there's been a fire. The library's burning." I rushed to the estate when the firefighters were already finishing extinguishing the fire. Fortunately, the flames were contained to one room, the main hall of the library, but the damage was significant. About a third of the books suffered from fire or water. "Looks like arson," the fire inspector told me. "The source of ignition was near the window, and there are signs of break-in." I stood looking at the charred shelves, feeling a wave of fury rising inside. They were really ready to destroy priceless books just so I wouldn't get the inheritance. But I had the foresight to take the most valuable volumes and documents. They didn't know about this and thought they had destroyed my evidence. This gave me an advantage. The next morning, I met with Martha Jenkins in Sarah's office. Martha turned out to be a pleasant woman in her 50s with kind eyes and calm manners. "Mr. Parker was a wonderful person," she said, reminiscing. "Always polite, patient. And his mind was sharp until the end. We often played chess, and he almost always won." "Were there signs that he was losing his memory or was disoriented?" Sarah asked. "None." Martha categorically shook her head. "He could quote entire pages from books from memory, always knew what day it was and what was happening in the world, read newspapers every morning and discussed the news." "And his grandchildren often visited him?" Sarah continued. "Mr. James and Miss Victoria came once a week, usually on my day off, but sometimes I saw them." Martha frowned. "Honestly, I didn't like them. They were always too insistent. After their visits, Mr. Parker often looked upset." "Did you hear their conversations?" "Once," Martha lowered her voice. "I came in unexpectedly to bring Mr. Parker his medicine. Mr. James was shouting at him, demanding he sign some papers, said that otherwise they would have serious problems." Sarah and I exchanged glances. This was exactly what we needed. "Are you ready to testify in court?" I asked. "Of course." Martha nodded. "Mr. Parker always treated me well. I want justice to prevail." We agreed that Sarah would prepare an official statement, which Martha would sign the next day. But the next morning, Martha didn't come to the meeting. She wasn't answering calls. Sarah went to her house and returned with bad news. "She refuses to testify," Sarah said grimly. "She looks scared, almost panicked, says she decided not to get involved in family matters." "What happened?" "I can only guess." Sarah shook her head. "But it seems that she was pressured. Martha has a son who works for a pharmaceutical company. The company recently received a large contract from a firm connected to your cousin." "They got to her too." I sank into an armchair, feeling despair overwhelming me. "I'm afraid so," Sarah nodded. "But we're not giving up. We still have documents and other evidence." But I no longer felt the previous confidence. The cousins were ready for anything. Arson, threats, blackmail. They had money, connections, influence. And what did I have? Returning to the hotel for the first time in these crazy weeks, I allowed myself to break down in tears. Everything seemed hopeless. Maybe I should accept Victoria's offer, take the library and disappear? Or agree to Michael's proposal and sell the entire collection, getting at least something? I spent the night sleepless, torn by doubts. I remembered grandfather, his stories, his faith in me. "You're stronger than you think, Lizzie, and smarter than they assume," he often said. By morning, I realized I couldn't give up. I couldn't betray grandfather's memory, his trust, his plan. He had foreseen all this, the resistance from the cousins, possible threats, and he still took the risk to restore justice. I took out my phone and dialed a number. "Mr. Hart, this is Elizabeth Parker. I'm ready to accept your help, and I have a plan." Daniel Hart turned out to be exactly the ally I needed. Unlike Michael Weston, he didn't try to deceive me or manipulate me. His climate-controlled vault became a safe haven for the books rescued from the fire, and his knowledge helped me decipher grandfather's encoded catalog. William loved puzzles, Daniel said, reviewing the Bibliophile's Codex. It wasn't just a quirk. He believed that knowledge should be earned, and the true value of a collection is revealed only to those who are willing to make an effort to understand it. We had been working on deciphering for a week. Progress was slow, but we managed to understand the basic principle. Grandfather used a reference system where each book was connected to another through hidden clues. Look, Daniel pointed to one of the entries. This line could mean Kant's New View, 1850 edition, page 117. And this one, Bacon's Labyrinth, I exclaimed. Grandfather had a rare edition of Francis Bacon's Novum Organum with an unusual title, The Labyrinth of Knowledge on the Dust Jacket. We rushed to test this theory. In my suitcase of rescued books was a first edition of Kant. Page 117 contained an underlined paragraph about understanding truth. In the margin was an almost imperceptible pencil mark. Labyrinth 23. Bacon's book was in Daniel's storage. On page 23, we found a thin bookmark. At first glance, an ordinary piece of paper, but upon closer inspection, embossed numbers appeared on it. 46.9483 degrees north, 7.4407 degrees east. Coordinates, Daniel whispered. But where is this? I quickly entered the numbers into a search engine. Bern, Switzerland. Daniel whistled. A Swiss bank? Quite possible, I was feverishly thinking. Grandfather often visited Switzerland. He said he loved the mountain air, but what if he had other reasons? We need to go there, Daniel said firmly. The sooner the better. The court date is in just 2 weeks. We need all possible evidence. I hesitated. A trip to Switzerland required money, which I had almost none left after paying lawyers and the private detective. I'll cover the expenses, Daniel said, as if reading my thoughts. Consider it an investment in justice. Why are you helping me so much? I asked directly. What's in it for you? Daniel was silent for a moment, then took an old photograph from his wallet. This is my father. He handed me a picture of a young man in military uniform. He served with your grandfather in a special unit for saving cultural valuables. They were friends, saved dozens of rare books together. When I started building my collection, your grandfather helped me, supported me with advice and contacts. He didn't take a penny in commission, though he could have. He just said, someday you'll be able to help someone just as I'm helping you. Apparently, that time has come. 3 days later, we were in Bern. The Swiss Credit Bank was located in an elegant old building in the city center. Inside, marble, wood, subdued lighting, and absolute silence. The perfect place for keeping secrets. I was nervous entering the manager's office. What if the coordinates pointed to a completely different place? What if grandfather didn't have an account here? What if... Miss Parker, a silver-haired Swiss man, rose to meet us. Very pleased to meet you. We've been expecting you. Expecting? I was surprised. Of course. Mr. Parker said you would definitely come sooner or later. We have clear instructions for this case. He took out a folder with documents. According to Mr. Parker's instructions, access to his safe deposit box can only be granted to his granddaughter, Elizabeth Parker, if she comes with the coordinates and presents an identification document. I handed over my passport, and the manager studied it carefully. Perfect. Let me escort you to the vault. Daniel remained in the reception area, and I followed the manager down a long corridor to a massive steel door. After several levels of security, we found ourselves in a spacious room with rows of safe deposit boxes. Here is your box, said the manager, leading me to one of them. I'll leave you alone. When you're finished, press the button by the door. The box opened with a soft click. Inside lay a small case and a sealed envelope with my name. I took them with trepidation and sat at a small table in the corner of the room. First, I opened the envelope. Dear Lizzie, if you're reading this letter, it means you've successfully completed my little quest. I always knew you would. Your sharp mind and pure heart are your best guides. Unfortunately, by the time you receive this letter, I will no longer be alive. But don't be sad. Death is just the next adventure, as one wise wizard from your favorite childhood book said. I must explain why I created this complex path for you. Several years ago, I began to notice oddities in James and Victoria's behavior. Disappearing documents, strange transactions, requests to sign papers. Without reading, it's just a formality. I pretended to be an absent-minded old man, but secretly watched and gathered evidence. When I understood the scale of their machinations, it was already too late. They controlled too much in the company, had connections in all the right places. I knew that direct confrontation would be futile, so I developed another plan. I made 2 wills, one, official, with Mr. Higgins, where I left you the library. The other, the real one, which you'll find in this case along with a video address and all the evidence I've collected. I knew that James and Victoria wouldn't appreciate the true value of the library. For them, books are just old paper. But you always understood that real wealth is stored not in safes, but in knowledge. Now you have everything necessary to restore justice. Use these materials wisely. And remember, Lizzie, no matter how valuable my book collection is, my most precious treasure is you. With love, your grandfather. I wiped away tears and opened the case. Inside was a flash drive, a notarized will, and a folder with documents. I looked through the will and gasped in surprise. According to this document, I inherited everything: the house, the company, accounts, lands. James and Victoria received only symbolic amounts. The flash drive contained a video message from grandfather. He recorded it a month before his death. Healthy, clear-thinking, he detailed the machinations of James and Victoria, explained why he made 2 wills, and officially confirmed that the real one was the one stored in the Swiss bank. The folder contained bank statements confirming the withdrawal of funds, copies of forged documents with fake signatures, witness testimonies, even audio recordings of conversations where James discussed with someone a plan to remove grandfather from managing his own company. This was a bomb, and now it was in my hands. The court hearing began at 10 a.m. on a rainy Tuesday. The hall was full, journalists, relatives, curious onlookers. In the front row sat James and Victoria, confident in their victory. Next to them, their lawyers, a whole army in expensive suits. The initial part of the process was predictable. The cousins' lawyers presented their version. Grandfather was incapacitated, was under my influence when he made the new will. They had witnesses ready to confirm his strange behavior in recent months. When it was our side's turn, Rebecca Fleming calmly stood up and addressed the judge. Your Honor, before we begin presenting evidence, my client has important information that radically changes the essence of the case. The judge nodded, and I approached the witness stand. Rebecca handed me the will from Switzerland. Your Honor, this is the real will of my grandfather, William Parker, drafted and notarized 6 months before his death. It was kept in a Swiss bank and was obtained by me 3 days ago. A murmur rose in the hall. James turned pale, and Victoria grabbed her lawyer's arm. Order in the court. The judge struck his gavel. Miss Parker, continue. My grandfather anticipated attempts to contest his will and made 2 wills. The first, the one that was read after his death, was just part of his plan. The real will is this one. I raised the document. In addition to it, there is a video message recorded by grandfather a month before his death, where he clearly explains his intentions and confirms that he is acting of sound mind. The cousins' lawyers rose with objections, but the judge asked them to wait until I finished. Moreover, Your Honor, I have evidence that my cousins James and Victoria Parker systematically manipulated grandfather, tried to present him as incapacitated, and diverted funds from the family company through shell companies. I handed the judge the flash drive and folder with documents. Here are bank statements confirming illegal transactions, copies of forged documents with fake signatures of grandfather, witness testimonies, and audio recordings of James Parker's conversations, where he discusses a plan to remove grandfather from managing the company. By this point, there was absolute silence in the courtroom. All eyes were on the judge, who was carefully reviewing the documents. "I suggest we take a recess so the court can review the new evidence," he said finally. "We will resume the session in 2 hours." As I was leaving the hall, James grabbed my arm. "You'll regret this," he hissed. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." "Release my client, Mr. Parker," Rebecca intervened. "Otherwise, threats of physical violence will be added to the charges of fraud and document forgery." The 2 hours of waiting seemed like an eternity, but when the judge returned to the courtroom, I could tell by his face that truth had prevailed. Having heard the presented evidence and examined the new documents, the court recognizes as valid the will of William Parker, drafted and notarized on September 10th of last year, and kept in the Swiss Credit Bank in Bern, announced the judge. "All provisions of this will take effect immediately." He paused and continued in a more severe tone. "Regarding the facts of financial fraud and document forgery revealed during the hearing, the court is forwarding these materials to the prosecutor's office for the initiation of criminal proceedings. James Parker and Victoria Parker must remain within the country until the investigation is completed." I couldn't believe it was over. Rebecca firmly shook my hand, and Daniel, sitting in the last row, smiled and gave a thumbs up. James and Victoria rushed out of the hall without waiting for the end of the session. I knew they would still try to fight, but now truth was on my side, and the evidence was irrefutable. 6 months later, I stood on the steps of the Parker Mansion, welcoming the first visitors to the William Parker Public Library of Rare Books. Much had changed after the trial. James was charged with fraud and forgery. He made a deal with the prosecution, pleading guilty in exchange for a reduced sentence. Victoria avoided criminal prosecution, but her reputation was ruined, and she moved abroad. The months following the court process were spent in a strange euphoria mixed with numbness. Victory hadn't come easily, and the realization that I was now the owner of the entire Parker empire didn't sink in immediately. For the first few weeks, I woke up every morning thinking it was all a dream, that there had been no trial, that grandfather was still alive and simply waiting for me in his library with a cup of hot tea. Reality, however, quickly made itself known. Phone calls, meetings with lawyers, financial consultants, tax specialists. I inherited not only a huge fortune, but also numerous obligations, connections, problems. Parker Investments turned out to be much more complex than I had imagined. 3,000 employees in 5 countries, dozens of subsidiaries, projects at various stages of implementation, and everyone expected that I, the suddenly appeared heiress, would know what to do. I honestly tried to understand the business. I spent weeks studying reports, meeting with department heads, visiting offices and production sites. I worked until late at night, trying to understand the complex mechanism created by grandfather over decades, and gradually came to the realization, this wasn't for me. I had always been a person of books, words, stories, not numbers, graphs, and strategic plans. Several times, I caught myself during important meetings, mentally returning to an unfinished book or translation I had been working on before all this madness. After a sleepless night spent in grandfather's library among half-burned bookshelves, I made a decision. The next morning, I summoned my chief lawyer, Peter Morgan, and chief financial officer, Emily Chen. "I'm selling the company," I said without preamble, "but on my terms." They exchanged looks with identical expressions of confusion on their faces. "Miss Parker," Emily began cautiously, "Parker Investments is a very complex asset. An instant sale could lead to substantial losses in value." "I didn't say instantly," I replied. "I said on my terms. And the main condition is preserving jobs. All jobs, in all divisions." Negotiations took almost 4 months. I rejected offers from 3 multinational corporations that offered more money but planned optimization, a pretty word for layoffs. In the end, the controlling stake was acquired by a consortium of investors led by Richard Lee, grandfather's former partner, who shared his values and vision for the business. The transaction amount was staggering, even considering that I insisted on retaining a minority share for the William Parker Charitable Foundation, which I created to support education and cultural projects. The first thing I spent part of the proceeds on was the complete restoration of the library. Not just repairs after the fire, but careful restoration involving the best specialists from different countries. The restoration proved more complex than I had anticipated. Many books suffered not only from fire, but also from water during firefighting. Some copies had to be sent to specialized laboratories in Italy and Japan, where virtuosos of book restoration literally restored the damaged editions page by page. For particularly valuable and rare books, we built a special repository with humidity and temperature control. For the rest of the collection, I decided to completely redesign the library space, replace the heavy Victorian cabinets with more modern and secure ones, install a new lighting system, create comfortable places for reading and study. Daniel Hart proved an invaluable assistant in this process. His knowledge of rare books and contacts in the collector's world helped not only to restore damaged copies, but also to supplement the collection with several unique additions. "You know what always amazed me about your grandfather?" Daniel said one evening as we were sorting books in the almost restored library. "He never collected books as investments or trophies. For him, each book was a living being with a history, a soul. I never saw him boasting about a rare addition to other collectors, but he could talk for hours to an enthusiastic listener about a little-known translation that he valued for the accuracy of conveying the author's intonation." Daniel's words resonated with a deep understanding in me. That's exactly how grandfather talked to me about books, as friends, as conversation partners, not as expensive things. That's when it hit me, the idea to open the library to the public. The following weeks I spent developing the concept with a team of architects, interior designers, and library specialists. My main condition was preserving the homey atmosphere of the library, its comfort and warmth. No sterile museum halls or display cases with "do not touch" signs. "Books should live," I explained to the architect, who looked somewhat skeptically at my idea. "Yes, some especially valuable editions will be available only to researchers and under special conditions. But the main part of the collection should be accessible for real reading, for direct contact." "You understand the risks?" he asked. "Books will wear out, may be damaged." "Books are created to be read," I replied, "even if the pages get worn from the touch of hands. Grandfather always said, 'An unread book is a dead book.'" In the end, we found a compromise that satisfied both me and the conservators. The main part of the library became an open space with comfortable armchairs, good lighting, and access to most publications. Rare and particularly valuable books were placed in a separate hall where they could be worked with under the supervision of a specialist. And the most unique specimens were kept in a special repository and issued only to researchers by appointment and with special precautions. I also set up a small apartment for myself in the house, several rooms in the West Wing with a separate entrance. The main part of the house was transformed into a public space. In addition to the library itself, there was a lecture hall, a restoration workshop, a cafe, and a souvenir shop, the income from which went to maintaining the collection. I scheduled the opening day for the anniversary of grandfather's death. A symbolic completion of the circle, the beginning of a new stage. The first visitors, by my invitation, were not high-ranking officials or celebrities, although the press was present, of course, but a group of philology students from the local university, young people who sincerely love literature, exactly those for whom, in my opinion, this library should exist. "Welcome to the Parker Library," I smiled, meeting them on the wide steps of the mansion. "Today, you will see one of the most unique private collections of rare books in the country. And not just see, you will be able to touch the history of literature." I noticed a mixture of delight and disbelief on their faces. In the modern world of digital technologies, physical contact with rare books seemed like something inaccessible, almost mythical. "Can we really touch them?" asked a girl with bright red hair tied in a tight bun. "Even in the university library, we can only look at some editions with gloves and through glass." "In the special section, yes, there will be gloves and special conditions," I replied. "But in the main halls, you will indeed be able to take books in your hands, feel the texture of the paper, see the notes in the margins made centuries ago. I believe that true understanding of literature comes through direct contact with the text in its original form." We entered the main hall of the library. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating dancing dust particles and creating an almost mystical atmosphere. Restored bookcases of dark wood rose to the ceiling, and between them, cozy reading areas had been created with soft armchairs and small tables. "The library is divided into several thematic sections," I explained, leading the group through the hall. "English literature from the Middle Ages to modern times, European classics, poetry, philosophy, history, natural sciences. Each section has its own color marking and cataloging system." I led them to a glass display case where an ancient folio was exhibited. "This is the first Shakespeare folio, 1623, I said, "one of the most valuable books in the world. Here, many of Shakespeare's plays were published for the first time, which otherwise might have been lost forever. Note the autograph on the flyleaf." The students bent over the display case, examining the yellowed pages with an ink inscription. "To my friend William, whose memory will live forever, Ben Jonson." Is this really Ben Jonson's autograph?" whispered a tall young man in glasses, clearly not believing his eyes. "Yes," I smiled. "One of the few preserved. This book is a true treasure, not only because of its financial value, but also as a connecting link between us and the geniuses of the past. When you look at these lines, written by the hand of a person who knew Shakespeare personally, 400 years seem to disappear." We continued the tour. I showed them first editions of Jane Austen with dedicatory inscriptions, Byron's manuscripts with his own corrections, a unique copy of Alice in Wonderland with illustrations by Lewis Carroll. In the rare books section, the students, holding their breath, put on cotton gloves and, under the curator's guidance, were able to turn the pages of Incunabula from the 15th century, early printed books with elements of hand-painted illustrations. "And this," I led them to a simple wooden shelf, "is my grandfather's personal collection. Books he loved to reread, many with his notes in the margins." I took out a worn volume of The Three Musketeers and opened it to a random page. In the margins, grandfather's pencil notes were visible. "Brilliant example of dialogue construction. Point out to students the parallel with ancient heroes." "Was your grandfather a teacher?" asked one of the students. "No, a businessman," I smiled. "But in his soul, he always remained a scholar and educator. He had a dream, to create a place where people could truly communicate with books, not as museum exhibits, but as conversation partners." After the main tour, I invited the students to freely explore the library. They dispersed throughout the halls. Some immediately immersed themselves in studying first editions of modernists, some carefully leafed through ancient folios, some settled comfortably in armchairs with volumes of Dickens. I stepped back to the window, watching them. Beyond the glass, the autumn garden of grandfather's, now my house, was gilded under the rays of the setting sun. The leaves of maples and oaks, planted by my great-grandfather, created a living mosaic of red, gold, and bronze shades. From the window, a small memorial I had installed in the very heart of the garden was visible, a bronze figure of grandfather sitting in an armchair with a book in his hands. The sculptor amazingly accurately captured his characteristic pose, head slightly inclined forward, as if he's listening to the words on the page, a slight smile in the corners of his lips. "He would be proud of you," Daniel said quietly, approaching from behind. "I don't know anyone else who would have embodied his dream so precisely." "I hope so," I smiled. "Although sometimes I feel like I still haven't found that real treasure he talked about." All this time, I thought it was some specific book, some special volume or document that would change everything. Really? Daniel nodded toward the students eagerly studying the books. I think it's right in front of you. The red-haired girl was carefully holding a volume of Keats' sonnets, her eyes shining with delight. The bespectacled young man was taking notes, comparing different editions of Hamlet. In a far corner, two students were quietly but animatedly arguing about something found in an ancient history book. I suddenly remembered myself at their age, sitting in this very library, listening to grandfather's stories, lighting up from contact with the great minds of the past, finding in books answers to questions I couldn't even formulate. Grandfather once told me a strange thing, I said thoughtfully. I was a teenager then, we were sitting here in the library, and I asked him why he spent so much money on old books that nobody reads. He looked at me for a long time, and then replied, Lizzie, books are not just words on paper. They are bridges between the souls of people who lived in different eras. When you read Shakespeare, you talk to him directly, without intermediaries. When you hold a book that Byron held, you touch his life. The real treasure is not in the gold or rarity of the edition, but in this invisible connection of souls. I looked at the young people whose faces glowed from contact with history and knowledge, at the ancient folios that had survived centuries and preserved the wisdom of generations, at grandfather's house, filled with new life, and suddenly understood that the real treasure is not one specific book or document. It's the legacy of knowledge passed from generation to generation. It's the ability to share what you cherish with others. It's the courage to stand up for truth and justice, even when it seems all odds are against you. I recalled all the stages of our struggle, from the first shock at the reading of the will to the triumph in the courtroom, remembered how I learned to believe in myself, how I overcame fear, how I found the strength to continue when it seemed all was lost. You know, I said to Daniel, Grandfather left me two things. The visible one, this library, and the invisible one, a lesson that real value is not in objects, but in the principles by which you live. In the courage to defend what you believe in the willingness to share your treasures with others, making them richer, not materially, but spiritually. Daniel silently took my hand. We stood by the window, watching as young people discovered worlds contained between the pages of old books. In their eyes burned the same fire of curiosity and delight that I saw in grandfather's eyes when he told me about a particularly valuable find. Only now do I understand, I whispered, what his favorite expression meant. Good books, like good people, only grow wiser with age. He wasn't talking just about books. He was talking about what's important in life. Growing, learning, becoming better with each day lived. At that moment, I felt that grandfather was truly nearby. He hadn't just left me a collection of rare books. He had left me a legacy of values that can't be measured in money. Courage, honesty, love of knowledge, faith and justice. The real treasure had been inside me all this time, and now I could pass it on, as he once passed it to me. When the students began to leave, promising to return next week, I escorted them to the door. The red-haired girl was the last to leave. Miss Parker, she said, stopping at the threshold. Thank you. I never thought I would be able to just take and read a poem from a manuscript written by the poet himself. It's like a conversation across time. A conversation across time, I repeated, smiling. You know, that's exactly what my grandfather would say. Come again. This library is now yours as much as it is mine. When she left, I returned to the empty library. The silence, filled with the whispers of thousands of books, enveloped me like an old familiar blanket. I approached grandfather's writing desk, opened the secret drawer, and took out the Swiss bank key, the only thing I decided to keep just for myself, as a reminder of our journey. Thank you, grandfather, I whispered, looking at the bronze figure in the garden, illuminated by the last rays of the setting sun. You were right. I found the real treasure. If you enjoyed the story, please support it with a like and comment.